My recent series on Frederick Law Olmsted's travels throughout the South has drawn a lot of activity in the comments section, especially on the video about his unfavorable impression of Southern hospitality, which he claimed was vastly inferior to that offered weary travelers in New England and New York. A certain kind of Northern viewer has delighted in seeing their stereotypes about the South as a miserable backwater confirmed by Olmsted, while a certain kind of Southerner has sneered at Olmsted's entitlement, self-righteousness, and condescension, calling him another Yankee snob who should have stayed home. I'm not here today to try to argue anyone out of these opinions, but I do think some additional facts and context about the culture war in which travel writers like Olmsted were participating and which led to the Civil War would be helpful. First and foremost, since a number of commenters thought Olmsted was writing about the South during Reconstruction, it's important to reiterate that Olmsted's Southern travels occurred during the 1850s, that is, during the decade leading up to the Civil War, when the South was at the height of its prosperity. However, like many Northerners, Olmsted was skeptical of this prosperity, and part of the purpose of his travels was to substantiate his belief that slavery was an inefficient system of labor that was holding back the South economically. Olmsted, who was a farmer as well as a landscape architect and journalist, believed that not just Northern industry but Northern agriculture was superior to that of the South. Robert William Fogel and Stanley L. Engerman gave extensive critical treatment to Olmsted's economic indictment of the South in their groundbreaking study of the economics of the slave system. They wrote, Olmsted concluded that the peculiar institution kept not just slaves, but virtually the entire free population in deep poverty. The deeply impoverished included not just landless free farmers, but even those owning substantial land and as many as 5 slaves. In Olmsted's words, the majority of those who sell the cotton crop were poorer than the majority of our day laborers at the North. To live in a moderately comfortable way, a planter had to own at least 50 slaves. Thus, slavery was a boon only for those at the very top of the Southern economic pyramid, for just the top 2% of slaveholders. Olmsted attributed this poor performance directly to the institution of slavery. The most serious defect of the system was that the labor of the slaves was typically of a very low level of productivity. In Olmsted's view, the low productivity of slaves ramified into every aspect of the economic life of the South. It degraded the entire standard of labor. Because of this low standard, white workers were driven to indolence, carelessness, indifference to the results of skill, heedlessness, inconstancy of purpose, improvidence, and extravagance. Thus, white Southern labor was even less efficient than slave labor, on average accomplishing only about 2/3 as much as slave labor. The poor quality of all Southern labor resulted in the wasting of resources. The natural fertility of land was rapidly undermined, tools were frequently broken, livestock was neglected, labor skills were allowed to decay, managerial skill was scorned. Generations of historians of diverse viewpoints came to rely uncritically on Olmsted's observations, which have shaped the popular view of the economy of the Old South. But Fogel and Engerman found that about 50% of Olmsted's Southern travels occurred after the completion of the harvest, but before the onset of the period of intensive cultivation. Fogel and Engerman also found serious flaws in Olmsted's attempt to use census data to evaluate the Southern economy, both with respect to the income of slaveholders and his aggregate measure of labor efficiency. They also pointed out that Olmsted, like most of those in both the anti- and in the pro-slavery camps, shared the conviction that blacks were, for racial reasons, generally inferior to whites both as laborers and as human beings. Ironically, Olmsted's obvious goodwill toward Negroes has served to distract attention from the extent to which his biases led him to belittle the quality of black labor. Even more, it has lent substantial unwarranted credence to his contention that slave labor was at best only half as productive as Northern white labor. Historian Susan Mary Grant points out the lag time between the publication of Olmsted's original letters to the New York Times, which were written and published during his travels of December 1852 to August 1854, and their anthologizing in book form in the late 1850s and early 1860s. But the time a journey in the seaboard slave states was published in 1856, for example, the main elements of the Republican critique of the South were already in place. Republican propagandists were in the process of fine-tuning this critique and adding supporting evidence, but its essential elements had already been established. Olmsted may have been influenced by this. What is certain is that he chose to alter several of his letters before they appeared in his books. Consequently, the image that Olmsted conveyed to the Northern public in 1853 and 1854 was different from that presented after 1856. As to the cause of this change, historians isolate the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 as the crucial turning point for Olmsted, the straw that broke the camel's back. For Olmsted, the Kansas-Nebraska Act indicated that the North was incapable of holding to its principles and was too willing to accede to Southern pressure. Consequently, by the late 1850s, Olmsted was less inclined to offer the hand of friendship to the South or even to make allowances for its problems. For that reason, he saw fit to present the South in a more negative light, to play up incidents of cruelty that he had downplayed before. The same motivation may have prompted Olmsted to play up incidents of Southern inhospitality in his book The Cotton Kingdom, which was published in 1861 for a British readership at a time when the North was fervently pressuring the British not to recognize the Confederacy. It's worth taking travel writing in any place and period, whether it appears to support or refute our preconceptions, with a grain of salt. Ultimately, it tells us as much about the writer as it does about the ostensible subject. Please subscribe if you haven't already, hit the like button and comment below, and watch another video or two of mine if you have time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.